maybe let me rather phrase it like that. Is there room for accessing God in a way that does connect with who you are? And if there is room for that, what does that then look like?
I think that God designed things such that we all exhibit an aspect of Him.
Tell them we are called. Then you say, well, the call means now you must come and, do this thing. Then who is making the disciples in that space? And the same could be true of teachers and brown, black or brown when I saw you in Cape Town.
They were black.
No.
Yeah,
They just seem different. Maybe it's because of the green and the green and the yellows giving it's giving you stand for something.
just the Lord.
Yeah, okay. Fair.
No.
Fair.
Handling my inner Jackie Hill Perry.
Fair. Oh yeah, I see that. Mojo Magic, we are in your hands, my brother.
No, 100%. Well, it's good. It's good that we could reconvene. Today we are exploring the subject of worship. So, and I wasn't quite sure necessarily where to start us off with, but I thought like there's a statement I'd like to put out there, but I thought maybe before doing so, it would be interesting to hear your guys' thoughts. Any opening thoughts on when you hear the word worship? What does that mean for you, or what do you think of, or what comes to mind? So I'll just throw it into the room there before I share the thought that which we'll then explore further. Anybody?
So the question is, what comes to mind? What do we think of in response to worship? I mean, I'll go first so that I can give the generic answers, and then the brothers with the depth will come through. I guess a response to God and His awe and His wonder and His splendor, in whatever form that is.
Can I, excuse me, can I say what I thought? So it's not going to be the usual answer. I actually can't remember who it was who was talking about how when they worship. Oh, Sbu, was it you who was talking about this? When they worship, everybody faces forward, and there's no band that's facing backwards, because it's when there's a band that's facing forward, there's too much that's distracting the people from what we're supposed to be doing in the service. That's the immediate thought that came up. And I wondered what I thought about that, the place of a band and which way they face in worship in a service context.
Talk about hot off the blocks. I can't remember if I said that, Mandla, but I'm praying that it was me, because it sounds like there's a lot there. So for me, the first thing I thought of when you said the word worship was the word object. So so there's an implication in the word worship, right? There's an object of the worship. So to worship implies you have something to worship. It is an object. What is the object of your worship? That there's an object of your worship, and that object is viewed in the context of worship implies a dynamic between the worshipper and the object that is being worshipped, right? And there is a power dynamic that is implied in that as well. Yeah. So yeah, I know it's ethereal, sorry, but yeah. And you?
No, it's good. It's good. It's interesting. Like speaking to this group of individuals, these are the types of answers that one can come to expect, which is really good. I'm encouraged, so to speak, by those responses from my side. So, and we'll double click on some of what has been said now. If I can propose, then this, at least from my side, working, if I can use this working definition of worship, and then we'll unpack, I suppose, a little bit more. I would suggest that worship is an act initiated by God, whereby, bringing our truest selves, we are invited to participate in His self-revelation and thereby be transformed in response. Okay, I'll say that again. So, worship is an act that's initiated by God, whereby, bringing our truest selves, we are invited to participate in His self-revelation and thereby be transformed in response. So it's probably a bit of a loaded statement there, so to speak, or a lot that's put in there. But I think everybody has mentioned something which is encapsulated in that particular thought. And so, for example, if I double click on what you were saying, Liz, you were saying that it's a response to God. What do you mean by that?
I think in just experiencing, beholding, encountering, thinking on just the bigness of who He is, the majesty of who He is, just His awe, His wonder, His beauty, all of it. I think for me, worship is what comes out of me at the dawn of that revelation, be it in physical or, I guess, hard posture, be it in song, be it in art, be it in just deep contemplation, but be it in prayer even. It's just that experience of and engaging with this offering of Himself that elicits a response of sorts. Yeah.
I love that. And Sbu, you also denoted an object, so to speak, that I suppose one is responding to or engaging with. Care to elaborate?
Yeah. Yeah, responding is the right word. Or reacting. Yeah. So it's the way you react to something or to someone. Now, in the Christian context, the object of our worship ought to be God. I'm gonna make that assertion. But I make that assertion alongside an assumption that human beings were created to worship. It's in our DNA, as it were. And so, within the context of the Christian worldview, then that worship, the object of our worship is God. But outside of the framing of the Christian worldview, then the object of our worship is quite obviously something else, right? So I think it is impossible, maybe the bigger point I'm making is it is impossible not to worship. It just is part of what it means to be human. The question then just becomes, what is the object of your worship? And then linked to that, just to close off my point, is by nature of what worship is, one wouldn't expect a person to worship an object that they felt was lesser than them in any form, right? So the implication is you are worshiping something that you believe is worthy of worship, that worship is due to them. And so the implication is that that thing has some kind of power over you, some kind of greatness that you are subordinated to. And so that's kind of the dynamic. And so again, in the in the Christian worldview, the assumption is that God, who is the object of our worship, is also the ultimate being worthy of worship, and that worship to God is appropriate because of a cognition of certain characteristics of who God is: omniscience, omnipotence, all that sort of stuff. But of course, outside of the worldview, a lot of those things are still true, not the characteristics, but certainly the implication of what it means to worship those things means that you're subordinating yourself to that thing, that thing has some kind of power or hold over you. And if Paul is to be believed, then the thing we are most in danger of worshiping other than God is ourselves.
So good. So you're opening a can of worms there. That I was like, there's a couple of directions that would love to go into. So I'm gonna pick one maybe for now, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. But if need be, I'm just saying there's definitely another vein of exploration. But in what has been mentioned so far, this idea of it's a response to something, right? Which I thoroughly agree with. There is something that is there that then commands something of you, so to speak. So there's an initiation process, and then we respond to that. And if I interpret what you're saying correctly, which is at least my worldview, is that there's, if we take the Christian worldview, there's God, and then we are meant to respond to who He is. But oftentimes, I would argue that at least if we use the worship can be understood more than just one particular thing, as in praise and worship is maybe a form of worship, but then there's other things, those, like you said, prayer, other forms of quote unquote liturgy. So understanding that all of that is possible, but at the end of the day, it can oftentimes feel like when we speak about worship, we speak about it in such a way as to how do I worship, or what is worship that makes sense to me. So in other words, there's this idea that we've spoken now about it's a response to something else that is greater than I, and yet it feels like oftentimes we are the center of what worship should be like. Or, we center ourselves seemingly more than what we should. Would that be a correct assumption? I'm arguing that it feels like that is the case, even based on what we've spoken about thus far. But I want to throw that out there. What do you guys think of that? Is there truth to that or not?
Yeah, absolutely. If I can take it back to Exodus, I was reading through Exodus, and how when Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, they're like, let's, who was it to? Aaron, make us a god. And I was like, what kind of people are these? Like, it just doesn't make sense to my current construct and worldview and how I look at the world. You've just been led out by this amazing God, and now they're asking for, or seemingly asking for another God. Make us a God. And doing some research on that, I discovered that their view, especially the Egyptian view at the time, was that that gods needed a body. So when they say make us a god, they're not saying literally create a god, but create a form, a body for God to come into, so that we can carry him wherever we are going. And it just struck me because Yahweh, God, is the one who is the initiator. He's the author. It's him who begins, and we go where he says and where he directs. But this concept of making a God, an image that you put God inside, you are like, you're carrying him wherever you want to go, and you're asking him to do the things that you want him to do for you. And I think that it is in human nature to create forms, or initiate and say, God, come with me, I'm the center of it. And I think scripture was highlighting that in Exodus, when it was like, make us a God, and out of this fire, this ram came up. And I just think that we do that in life, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unwittingly. Just, God, be the circle around my center. Yeah.
I love that. And if I can comment on that, it's funny because I was also thinking Exodus, but almost with an empathy perspective, because so someone who's covered in tattoos, for instance, that all speak to a momentous encounter of a facet of the heart of God. I've chosen to then mark my body as a reminder, and that is not to say that the tattoo on my body then is God, but it's meant to function as this thing that consistently reminds me of that one mountain moment. And I think there's something about the human experience that is, within consciously or unconsciously or subconsciously, aware of the fact that we are known to forget. And there's something about a physical representation of just the awesomeness of God, and the bigness of God that I don't always think is intended to reduce him, but to make him accessible, tangible, here. But there is no version of that that doesn't, by extension, make that facet of God an idol. And in Sbu's definition, and one of the tangents I was going to ask in sort of how you were outlaying it was, is it possible to essentially idolize or worship a facet of something, because that part of it you acknowledge as something you are then, subservient to, or it has a greater, I guess, power over you, and you acknowledge that, but not its entirety. And is that maybe how we end up chopping up God, to worship the facets of him, and whether it's intended or unintended, but maybe initially from a place of, I want to remember this part of God. God is goodness, God is love, but then he becomes only love, or only goodness, or only justice, because he was never, no facet of him was meant to stand alone.
You know what you guys are describing. So both when you were speaking, Liz, and when Smiglo was speaking, the first thing was, we still do the same thing, right? We still want to make a God. We want to put God into a body or a form. And there's something about our discomfort. So it feels like we have an innate discomfort with the vastness of God. And so because of that, our mission, we're all, sorry for the turn of phrase, but we're hell-bent on putting God into a space, into a size, into a conceptual frame that we can then comprehend and consume, right? So we are just extremely uncomfortable with the vastness of who God is. So much so that our knee-jerk reaction automatically is, okay, how do I reduce this thing into something that I can comprehend, right? Because we want to maximize our comfort. I am comfortable understanding a God because I can see, the edges here. We're just uncomfortable living with the idea that this thing is just, it cannot be comprehended. We can't live that. And there's a part of that has sinful roots, right? There's a part of that, at least in my estimation, it's part of what, in the first couple of episodes of this season, it's part of what we spoke about what broke in the garden of Eden when we ate when Eve and Adam ate of that fruit. There's something there that broke. And there's something about what happened when this idea of self was placed on some level that seemed even adjacent to God positionally, right? So that's what the serpent was saying when he said, God's lying to you because he knows when you eat this, you will be like him. So there's like a positional thing that happened there that we are unable to, at least on our own power, we are unable to rectify that thing completely. And because of that, our response always is, okay, how do I make this something that I can comprehend? How do I make this something that I can, and so God needs to look a certain way, or he must sound a certain way, or I must feel a certain way when I'm relating to God. We spoke about it last week about this idea of peace. Like, that's how I'll know it's God, because then I'll have this. It's about what I feel in relation to it. It's about what it sounds like in my ear. That's how, you know what I mean. That usness of it. We're just so uncomfortable relenting and relinquishing. Maybe that's what it is. Sorry. Maybe that it's just an inability to completely relinquish this ourselves to this thing. Yeah.
Can I add a layer? Or a thought?
I love it. When you guys were talking, I can't remember if it was shared here or if it's somewhere else where I heard the phrase, but
If it was season
season one potentially, but just even this the flip on the script of obviously in Genesis, God said, "Let us make man in our image," and now we've come to a point where we say, "Let us make God in our image." That particular hits it hits hard, and it's so true in that respect. So Smidla's, what you're saying is that God be the circle in my sense, like saying all of the things there. So then I guess if there's a sense of acknowledgement, then at least a consensus here, Guti, that we're centering ourselves in ways that we shouldn't. And an adjacent question is, and it will touch on a little bit on what Liz maybe you were alluding to or getting to as well, is then how do we deal, or is there room, maybe let me rather phrase it like that, is there room for accessing God in a way that does connect with who you are. And if there is room for that, what does that then look like? Or what are the bounds of navigating worship from that place or with that in mind?
So the first thing that sort of pops up for me or in my spirit is the notion of sonship. And what I mean by that is I think when you have a revelation, and just jumping off of the whole Genesis, let us, you'll be like God, but also in the creation story, let us make them in our likeness. When you have an understanding that fundamentally in God creating man intentionally in his likeness is a connectedness there. And then by extension, the cross and the adoption into who Christ is, there's an unseverable connection between you and your Father that I think can start to deal with some of the, I think, complexities, the discomfort that even Sbu spoke about, that can sometimes make this big, seemingly abstract, seemingly distant God a constant, if that makes sense. So it's like when you know whose you are, I think the forms of worship feel less strivey and less trying to capture and reduce and make tangible something that feels far away because I know that I know that I know that whether I feel it or don't, whether it's a good day, it's a bad day, whether I've heard you speak or I haven't, whether I viscerally feel and can engage with the weightiness of your glory or not, you are still God and my Father, and you haven't changed your mind about me. You're still good regardless of what's going on. But I think when all these become an ebb and flow sort of reality, I think that starts to influence even just using worship music as a category, become more us oriented and the weight of my feelings in relation to how far you are, how I don't feel you, or I don't know what you're saying about me. And it becomes it moves further and further away from that initial definition of just like your majesty, the bigness of who you are, and responding to what is consistently true. So I think sonship for me is that thing.
Can I check on to that? I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Sometimes though you only know sometimes your ability to know something is also impacted by the kind of teaching you get. And so I don't know if sonship is something that is taught about enough. There are two books that come to mind. The one is called Becoming a King. I can't remember the author, Morgan something, but he speaks about sonship. And another one is Fathered by God, which also talks a lot about sonship, but teaching is such an imperative thing. But the other thing I was going to say is I think we're not taught enough about the sovereignty of God. I think part of the reason people are so good at bringing God to themselves or themselves to God, however you want to frame it, is because a lot of our teaching is about look at how this God is going to look at what loving this God will mean for you. Look at how being part of this fraternity will impact your life. Look at how good it is for you. Look at how many things and benefits you will get. So a lot of the teaching we get is centered around what it means for you. So then what can happen is that it dilutes your ability to worship God for his sake. and for His sake alone, because what it means for you, how you benefit, how it helps you, what you can do as a result of the blessing you will get is so, man, our diet is so saturated with that stuff that even if we had more teaching about the sovereignty of God, um, and sometimes it's so bad that when God says no, we'll attribute that to the devil. Right? You know what I mean? We cannot comprehend that God said no to that thing. It's like, oh, it's because the enemy has worked against me. That's why. Sometimes, I'm not saying oh, but sometimes we're so drunk on God giving us the things that we want and our lives working out a particular way because we're children of God in everything, that when God does say no, and He does a lot, we're unwilling to even fathom that, oh, no, this is not the sovereignty of God at play. This is actually the enemy's ploys now. And then don't worry, the Lord will, you know what I mean? And there's something about sovereignty there that I think we under index so much. And so much of our teaching is about come see what this will mean for you. Come here. How, yeah.
Wow, man. I mean, that's a whole couple of episodes, right there. Yeah, I agree, and it's amazing how Scripture comes across as God being sovereign in the sense that He is both for us and all His thoughts are for us and about us, but at the same time, He is self-sufficient and all about Himself. and and we seem to be unable to carry those two together. We have to focus on the one or the other, and we tend to focus on the one, which imbalances us. Yeah. I mean, I had I don't know if I'm answering Mojo's question properly, but just about how we connect to the greatness of God. I think that, you know, how Scripture talks about how He fills all things in every way. I think that God designed things such that we all exhibit an aspect of Him, and maybe are even drawn towards a certain aspect of Him, maybe in an overweight way, intentionally so, because we are part of a body, because there needs to be somebody who's able to hold the staff really well, because the foot can't do it and the ear can't do it. But this is God. And if we as a body are to fully explore and experience and enjoy and understand the God, it's important that we do have aspects that that we lean into more. So I do think that God intentionally allows us to have different expressions and different strengths in terms of our expression of Him. We can't all be, well, I think it's designed that we're not all everything for the purpose of being the body. It feels to me that He designed things that way. And you know, sometimes I'm like, to you know, to my wife is like, wow, you're so strong in this area, and it may be an area that I'm not so comfortable with, but she has to be that way so that, you know, I can understand, hey, this is an aspect of God, behold the severity and the how can I go blank? The kindness and the severity of God. Yeah, yeah.
Hey,
Um,
you're
I
preaching
didn't mean to
there.
cut you off for you. I wasn't sure if you're finished there.
No. I'm done there.
No, I love it. Um, in the things we're mentioning, like there's there's a sense of like, yeah, this is perhaps what it should be, and we recognize, okay, I think this is part of what's contributing to why we are where we are, and all that, um, which is it's important stuff to acknowledge, and I think for us to think about. I I I I'd like us to then reflect on either say our own things, or say maybe the spaces in which we have worshipped in the past, no? And I wanna throw in these two thoughts, and let's see where this might go. So I think I think his name is Don Saliers, if I'm but he says that theological understandings are mediated through worship. Okay, so that's a nice short quote. So, and I think it's Sally Brown who says that worship practices articulate congregations' understanding of human divine relationship. So, these two thoughts, the idea that what we do in worship, I suppose, communicates an understanding, or it communicates theology, or it communicates our understanding of the human divine relationship. So, then based on the things that we've done, based on the things that we do, whether individually or collectively, what does that then say of what we understand? I think we're touching on it somewhat, but let's, assuming you agree with the statements, and if you don't agree with them, yeah, please let's state those to be the fact as well. But I'm presenting this as, from my side, saying I agree with these statements. I think our actions are an embodiment of our beliefs, and so if in our action and our activity we convey certain understandings, then what are we saying through what we are doing?
Before anybody goes, because you asked us to say it from our context, huh? From our context in relation.
From your paradigm, yes.
Before we offer our paradigm, can I invite another to offer a paradigm?
Sure.
He's been invited many times in this in our conversations. It's our older brother, Mr. Tozer, who writes here in the book, which is a compilation of his insights about worship. I'm just going to read it. It's a page, but I'm just going to read it, and then just so you can hear how he, but this, anyway. So he says, and I quote, "Another example of our wrong thinking about God is the attitude of so many that God is now a charity case. He's a kind of frustrated foreman who cannot find enough help. He stands at the wayside asking how many will come to his rescue and begin to do his work. Oh, if we would only remember who he is. God has never actually needed any of us, not one. But we pretend that he does, and we make it a big thing when someone agrees to work for the Lord. We all should be willing to do work for the Lord, but it is a matter of grace on God's part. I am of the opinion that we should not be concerned about working for God until we have learned the meaning and the delight of worshiping him. A worshipper can work with eternal quality in his work, but a worker who does not worship is only piling up wood, hay, and stubble for the time when God sets the world on fire. I fear There are many professing Christians who do not want to hear such statements about their busy schedule, but it is the truth. God is trying to call us back to that for which He created us, to worship Him and to enjoy Him forever. It is then out of our deep worship that we do His work. I heard a college president say that the church is suffering from a rash of amateurism. Any untrained, unprepared, unspiritual, empty rattletrap of a person can start something religious and find plenty of followers who will listen and pay and promote it. It may become very evident that he or she had never heard from God in the first place. These things are happening all around us because we are not worshippers. Just wanted.
Why does Tosa keep coming for us?
I just wanted to bring. There's a paradigm there. This idea that one of the paradigm issues here about why is because of our view of ourselves in relation to God, that He needs us for something. He couldn't do this without us. I just wanted to offer his paradigm.
No, we receive his paradigm. Thank you. That man. He keeps saying things.
A lot was said. So I will quote Tozer to frame my paradigm, because I think in this particular quote, and it's a short one, it's one line, is maybe starting to chat to the specific contextual things that I think I've seen emerge. And Tozer writes, the church that can't worship must be entertained, and men who can't lead a church to worship must provide the entertainment. And I think that touches a little on Mandla's statement at the beginning about what comes up for him when he hears worship. I think we've gotten very good at holding spaces, entertaining and hoping somewhere along the way, to quote what we say in our services, the Holy Spirit will come, because apparently He comes and leaves. And then what was entertainment will become worship. That's what I think.
You just had to throw that in, that apparently He comes and leaves with. You just
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't the only one to pick that up. Okay, cool.
Oh man, I am thinking about, and I hope this makes sense. I'm thinking about the idea of our work being worship. That whole paradigm, and this is the context. I can't remember where it is. I think it's Deuteronomy, where it says, Scripture says, the land that I'm taking you to, Canaan, is not like the land that you've come from, Egypt, where you had to irrigate with your feet for sustenance. But the land where you're going is a land where the Lord Himself waters. It's mountains and valleys, and He looks after it. And I've been thinking about this idea of the Lord who sustains and provides, and as opposed to us who sustains and provide for ourselves. And I've been thinking that we have this paradigm on earth that our work is primarily for our provision. And I've just been, and this is an incomplete thought, but I've just been thinking that I think that our work is primarily for our worship, to express the things that God's put in us. And He wants us to learn how to live in such a way that we can find provision through our work, but that is not the God of it. That is not the intention of it. He puts stuff in us, and we're to express it through work, and that's our worship to Him, because we are looking at Him as our provider. I think the context we live in today is just so convoluted and just diluted and messed up, if I can say that we don't know how to do good work unless it provides for us well. And I'm not sure how it all works together, how, the Lord provides, but He provides through our work, and there's the faith aspect of it. But I do think that there's this whole discussion we need to have around how now shall we live, and how do we look at our work. Man, I'm just paying the bills. I know it's a construct that we have, but I don't know if that is supposed to be the primary thing. I reserve the right to change my mind, but I'm thinking about things this way. It is the Lord God who gives you the ability to gain wealth. That in some way frees me to explore the things God's put in me and work at them, and trust Him to find a way to have provision through them, knowing that it comes from Him.
Part of why I think that's the case is because I don't think we grasp that work is also a reflection of God's character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Work itself, not the work you do, work, the idea of work. Because, before Adam and Eve messed everything up, work was very much part and parcel of what it meant to be part of an ecosystem that reflects the majesty of who God is. That's why He put them in the garden. It was to work it. Work is in working, we are doing something in the image of God, because He is also a God who works and does things. Work in and of itself is a reflection. And so, to build on your point, for me, I'm reminded of, some of these high church denominations, whether it's the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church or some of the high church denominations in the Protestant Church, that use these tools for prayer, like prayer beads. And they'll pray these particular prayers, and the prayers are repetitive. And the idea behind them is that it even becomes meditative when you're praying. And the idea behind it, at least part of the idea behind it, is to try it. So you use this tool of praying, and it's designed to help facilitate a way by which you can meditate on the things of God and meditate on the Word of God. Because prayers are imitations of verses from the Bible. And the idea is, when you're praying and you're using these prayer beads to pray, that you're breathing as well. And part of the reason for that is to try and live out in practice what it means when the scripture says that every breath is a prayer to Christ. So this idea that everything we do is worship in some way, shape, or form, or reflection, even the work that we do. But to that same point that you said, Mandla, that only works if the positional understanding of who we are and who God is not distorted. But because we've distorted it, and we then also take the position of God in our own lives, then we use what we have to make a reality of our own fashioning and a world of our own fashioning. And suddenly the things I can do with my hands makes reality for me, right? And God,
Yeah.
and also a distortion of that understanding, because God created the world such that we can do things and those things have material impact on our world. But we've taken that, and instead of looking instead of putting something together and conjuring something and saying, look at what your creation has done, us being part of that creation, we say, Lord, look at what I've done. You see what I'm saying? Um, uh, and that's part of the tricky thing. And then it becomes even more dangerous when we do it with what, to Tozo's point, is becomes the realm of the things of God, whether it's starting a church, being a pastor, whatever the case, you know what I mean? Because then and so then those things become separate things. So it's like, I'm going to work for the Lord. Oh, so the rest of us, you know what I mean? It's we anyway.
So good.
I love
Yeah.
that. I can just throw in Mandla. I'm not sure if you've read Garden City by John Mark Comer. He's the author of The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. So I'm currently reading the book. He sort of lays out this theology of rest, but sort of inversely our misunderstanding of work. And he starts by laying out this framework about when you look in the realm of sort of ecology and many others. So he references a few different, I guess, ecosystems of deities, if you will. But he specifically outlines sort of Greek mythology, and he underscores that in essence, in their formulation of gods, is this understanding that the gods are sort of around existing, and sort of in the same way that God works, working, but positioned work as something inferior to them. So, therefore, humans were created as the slaves who must then do the work so the gods can rest. And I think that foundation still permeates society, where it's like the aim and the desire to accumulate money is so that I can rest. So, if I do it very quickly, and a crazy amount of money, the more time I have for rest, rather than this beautiful understanding of, first of all, it wasn't something beneath himself, so much so that he partakes in it with this one day of rest, which we know as Sabbath. So how then can it be that we see it in that way? And I think that's what I suppose Christianity should be trying to work back towards, is
Yeah.
repositioning work in a Christian understanding as this partnership with God, but also a response to God that is worship, and that He didn't see it as this thing beneath to be put aside and gotten rid of, or attributed to slaves, or whatever the case might be. That we see these remnants in society and through forms of capitalism, etc., etc. And I think it points to what you were saying, then, Sbu, even just the hierarchy we create of those who are working for God, and whatever the rest of us are doing, type thing, but also the insignificance of sort of purpose aligned work, and why that does something for health and wholeness, in a way that pure trying to stay alive, doing ends meet can be draining and in opposition, because maybe, just maybe, purpose aligned work is that beautiful intersection of showing up in the marketplace, contributing to communal existence, but also outworking the thing that God specifically created in you. So what you were mentioning earlier, Manda, about why we're created differently, and why we have a heightened or concentrated facet of God's person in us, that becomes a communal blessing, is that then in working in purpose aligned work is that expression in either its fullness or very close to its fullness, that then edifies you, exalts the people around you, and just blesses our existence as humanity amongst each other.
On building on what you guys are saying, there's you guys reminded me of there's a book by a guy, an author, Robert Banks, noting about how God works, or how He labors, and so it's kind of to destroy, I suppose, that divide between the quote unquote sacred and secular, so to speak, as if God only exists or primarily exists in these spaces and not in that. but kind of creates a bit of a shift in our thinking with regard to the whole work thing. And I suppose if maybe we have a different understanding of how God can show up in our work, I suppose then in seeing how we can offer that as worship in the right sense, so to speak. But he gives examples of the different ways that God works, and in that he gives examples of occupations within those particular examples, so to speak, just to show that it covers pretty much every spectrum. But I'll quickly read them. Like one, he talks about God's redemptive work, in that we see God saving and reconciling actions. And he secondly talks about God's creative work, that God's fashioning of the physical and the human world, and his creative hand being evident in all things. Third, he speaks of God's providential work, God's provision for and sustaining of humans and the creation. Four, he speaks of justice work, and that being God's maintenance of justice. Fifth, he speaks of God's compassionate work, that being God's involvement in comforting, healing, guiding, and shepherding. And sixth, God's revelatory work, being God's work to enlighten with truth. And again, in each of these areas, he speaks of vocations that people have, like, for example, whether you're a nurse or you're an educator or you are, in the justice area, but how in and through that is a facet of God's character that you can show even in your occupation, right? And so perhaps even in having that little bit of an understanding of God being shown in and through this potentially allows you to even show up in a way that is worshipful, I suppose, in a more meaningful way, even in how you conduct yourself in the outworking of your day-to-day, so to speak, activity. So yes, worship has something, I suppose, in every aspect of our lives. And I would go even one step further to say, I suppose, wherever we find ourselves, we should recognize that as an opportunity to be in worship in whatever we do, right? And we've heard it said in church many times, worship is a lifestyle, meaning in whatever you put your hand to, it's an opportunity to reflect the image of God in that space and in how you conduct yourself. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, and it's your session, Mojo. And do
No, go for it.
you recognize a question from the group? So if I was to say to you, one of the dangers of creating a divide between the kind of work that is sometimes considered working for the Lord and then all other work, assuming there are two buckets. Can you make a comment, anyone in particular, but I mean, Mojo's been asking more questions than answering, so maybe you can go first. I just want to invite you to comment on if there's a danger where we look at certain work as working for the Lord, whether it's starting a church, starting a Christian podcast, whatever it is, and other work as separate. What implication it has on the way those who are outside of that realm view those who are inside as, the power dynamic creates and the dangers inherent therein. Just a comment on, some of the outworking that can arise as a result of that. This is now me just trying to tease out a practical implication.
Yeah, for me, immediate answer, and then I'll try to keep it brief. And of course, I think there's a lot that can be said here. I think there's definitely a danger, and I would say it's an incorrect understanding of being a Christian, so to speak. We are all called to be disciples, for example, right? And in being disciples, we are all called to the mandate of discipleship and all of that, and being image bearers, etc., etc. So all of it. So I think the idea of relegating the quote unquote holy things to a particular group is that then we are absconding from certain responsibilities, whether willingly or unwillingly. We're just saying, we're attributing and saying this is the work of those people versus the work of the other people. And it's to say, well, how is that scriptural? How does that reconcile with, for example, what I've just said, that if I'm called to be a disciple, there's a particular request of being a disciple, or what Jesus expects or asks of us. So how do I reconcile those two things and saying it's only limited to that particular group of individuals? So that's like one of the things that, or some of what comes to mind. And I think of also practically what we would have seen historically is the idea that because of, I suppose, where faith fits into our lives, is that we can put then the people that are in that religious space as being better than, or they can be elevated or put on a pedestal, and which in and of itself brings its own dangers, because one, you disregard their humanity in many respects, and I think that has potentially devastating consequences for many parties involved, so to speak. So I'm speaking quite high level, but all to say is that, yeah, I don't subscribe to that school of thought that only certain people have the work of the kingdom upon them, so to speak. I think we all bear equal responsibility to the call. It's just that the mission field, is different for all of us. But in us being in on the mission field, the purpose of what being on that mission field is like is similar, I suppose, to all of us, being to reflect God to the world and to invite them, to come and participate and experience Him, so to speak. And there are people that you'll reach that I won't reach, right? And we need to carry our cross wherever we find ourselves. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Man, I think, sorry guys, can you hear that barking in the background?
Yeah, I wanted to know if you got a dog. Did you get a dog? Did you?
No dog.
Oh,
No. I wish. The Lord needs to bless me with a bigger house. Anyway, do you know what? We talk about robbing God, and shall a man rob God? I think that when we have that view of things, we're robbing people and we're robbing God. Like really, I'm that passionate about it because what happens is that we allow people to take time away from other things that they could be doing, and often they start spending all their energy in church-related activities. And I must be at the prayer meeting, and I must be at the social, and I must become whatever cell leader, and only the things, the activities that are church related are the ones that are deemed as acceptable. And we find
building. Can we or deemed as building? I said or deemed as kingdom building.
Deemed as kingdom building. Exactly. And you find people neglecting other areas of their lives completely. And I'm not against people taking time out of their lives. Maybe you're doing missionary work or things like that. But sometimes what we can do is we can position ministry work as the ultimate, and the best thing that you could do is just drop everything else and go to another country, or just be full-time in the church. And it can be positioned as this is the ultimate. And even the idea of calling, there can be a manipulation around that I think has shipwrecked many and can shipwreck many. And so we need to be so responsible with how we talk about this, because what it means is that people go along a path, and what they're supposed to be producing isn't being produced. Sometimes families suffer, and it can become a big deal. And the reason I say we're robbing God is that I think that there are people out there who have focused in the church ministry aspects of life, and they're supposed to be expressing some facet of God in some other way, and they're just not doing it because somebody told them that you're better off in this place. And I think that's robbing. And you're robbing them because they're just not becoming actually what God's called them to become and express. And I'm passionate about that.
So good. I think if I could add a layer to that, I think another thing then we see as a byproduct, exactly what you're describing, is then this like careerism that comes into the church, where it's like, okay, cool, let me study this ecosystem. Okay, if I become an intern and I stay here for long enough and someone recognize my gifts, they might just then throw me to this, and the end goal is to get onto church staff. And it's like all within this very narrow ecosystem, and someone uses it to state up lives, because they've attributed the same way that I suppose we would do in a secular setting of like this particular corporation and climbing up that ladder, and we start to see it outworked in sort of a church capacity. And I think it almost does greater damage than it would in sort of a secular commercial environment. And I think that's a facet of church hurt that I think a lot of people are actually healing from right now, that isn't necessarily named or articulated to be dealt with and responded to, because we've created this culture that allows that perspective to be true. I think, yeah, so there's that. And then the arsonist in me was hoping this chat would also start to touch on, I think, in creating this sacred and secular divide, what that means for those who are deemed aligned in vocation, in the sacred set of things, as the culture namers, culture definers, and that becomes a cultural expression of a church. And then before you know it, it's not our culture to worship like this, is where you find yourself. And it's not to single-handedly blame the person who does that. It's also to say, in developing this ecosystem and creating this power imbalance, we've sort of legitimized the ability to say that to some extent, because you've implied that as the one doing the work that is sacred, I honor like the sanctity of what that is, and I will then find someone whose worship aligns with the worship I desire to engage in and express, and let you build the thing that God has uniquely strategically called you to outwork in this very specific way for a very specific people, which is us.
And of course, all the while misinterpreting Matthew 28:19, right? Because if the Great Commission was to go and make disciples, then Jesus obviously knew he was talking to carpenters, he was talking to doctors, he was talking, and the implication of his statement was not, okay, come and be on staff and then we'll make disciples, right? I've often said to people, I think I've even had this discussion with my wife, was to say, in particularly in relation to grappling what it means to feel like you're called and then have this incredible capacity to manifest a characteristic of God in a skill set that you have. And I remember characterizing and saying, do you know, if all investment bankers who felt that they were called left investment banking and went to the church, then what is the witness going to be like in investment banking? If everyone who is a Christian, when you tell them we are called, then you say, well, the call means now you must come and, do this thing. Then who is making the disciples in that space? And the same could be true of teachers and doctors and people in marketing and whatever the case may be. Is for me, it's what happens when you create. For me, it's the same thing that happens in the world, right? So where in the world we subordinate certain careers to others. So we say, I don't know, whatever, lawyers are more important to society than teachers, or doctors are more important to society than mechanics. It's the same thing that we do spiritually when we say, well, those who are baptizers are more spiritually important to the body of Christ than. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we create that same hierarchical understanding that for me feels weird. It's weird. Yeah.
Moj, you are a testimony of someone who studied something that is highly regarded in society, and in complete obedience went to minister for what, 10 years, less than that, whatever. What was that like? And what was the reaction? Because I imagine a lot of it was like, wow. And I wonder if the wow was like, you left the money, or if the wow was like, oh wow, you really heard God. Like, yeah, what was that like?
No, that's a fair question. So yes, I maybe to give some detail to that. So yes, I did go study, finance and what would be, I suppose, regarded as a pretty, beset, so to speak, going that particular route. And then, I finished studies, all of that, and qualified. And yes, you make then feeling like if God would have me in quote unquote traditional ministry, if I can use that term, which is what you're referring to. And I mean, for me, it made sense in the sense I'm like, well, God, if this is where you want me, let's go. And I don't also say that flippantly, like there wasn't a cost to it. It was just, I mean, this God, my life is yours, so let's go. But I remember when I, for example, when I told my parents that this is the switch that's going to happen. The literally the first words that were said in response when I said I'm going to go work for the church, they said, "Are they paying you? Are you getting paid?" So vela this notion of wait, you're leaving something secure for something that is questionable, which is also I find ironic because then there's also this view that church and being a pastor and all that is something to something to be respected, and yet you don't want your own kin to necessarily. I don't know. It's a bit of an odd one there for me. But beyond that, to be honest, there might be some people who would have thought like this is strange, but I never got, other than what I've mentioned now, anything really explicit from people to say left money to go be in ministry, in that kind of thing, which was interesting. What one of the things I did find fascinating though in the journey is that I worked hard in corporate, like really, really hard, but I felt like I worked harder when I was in ministry. Um, and this is my experience of in terms of what I was doing. By the way, I'm not saying one is better than the other or anything like that. So I completely subscribe to everything we've been speaking about. But just to dispel any thoughts of like, you're doing a lighter work or you only work on Sunday, kind of, come on. No. I felt like I worked harder in that regard. But also, I suppose if you're in a space where you feel like God has got you, then there'll also be meaning and purpose to what you're doing, and it'll be a labor of love in many respects. But high level, Liz, to answer your question, is yes, there was the odd person here or there who looked at this with suspicion. I mean, maybe other examples, maybe when I was in the ministry side of things and you do tell people your background. Yeah, there were instances where I suppose people would be like, oh, so you did study something else and then you were here. So it almost maybe sometimes gives you a degree of a certain credibility maybe that you might not have, because if you'd gone straight into ministry in some people's eyes, I would say, no, you didn't land up here because you had no other options. I'm here because this is what I feel like the Lord would have me do, you know? So there were some instances like that. And I won't lie, like, Vele, when you're ministering, sometimes, I don't know, it certainly felt that way to me. Maybe to certain individuals, you need to give your credentials in order for them to hear you, which is wild. And I'm just saying it is a reality, so to speak. So yeah, there are instances like that, I suppose, that I could lean on that to say, but and I won't lie. Sorry, one last thing. I will say this. Even what I'm doing now, it is interesting how I'm able to profess the gospel or speak of Jesus and things like that in a way to certain individuals, because they respect the qualification that I have, that I got even before I got into ministry. So the fact that it's this dual package that I've got, it's an odd one for me, where I'm like, truth is truth, right? We should be able to receive it regardless of who it comes from. But I'd be lying to you if I said that there aren't individuals who aren't respecters of the package in which this truth comes.
Yeah, but I mean, if only our ears opened equally to everybody who spoke.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, so then should band members have music qualifications? No?
Yeah.
I'm asking. I'm not fighting. I'm asking. What do we need of those who are leading us in communal worship?
Well, is the music qualification the thing that will
I'm
help,
asking.
or is
Is a baptism
yeah,
certificate enough? Is it okay if it's my gig, but the day before I was playing for Freshly Ground? I don't
you're
know. I'm
asking a
asking.
question, but I think you're saying a lot of things as well.
I don't know.
Let me maybe ask you: is what does it sound like to you? Do you feel like leading a congregation in worship? Again, this is a term we've created, right?
Mm.
Uh, do you feel like leading a congregation in worship is distinct from making manifest musical abilities, and how, why?
What did I say? Toza said earlier on about entertainment and worship. I think for me, and maybe this is where I hold a traditional view, or maybe needs refining, and truthfully, it's still something I'm wrestling with. I have strong feelings about knowing that last night you were in the club and today you're saying, sing it out, church. I don't know. There's something about that for me that's like, no, I'm not okay. It's not right for me personally. And I don't know if it's because there's a sanctity for me about the altar, and not assuming that. So it's not inherently about the fact that you were at the club. It's I need to know that you have consecrated yourself and maintained a degree of consecration that doesn't unnecessarily complicate what we're here to do together. It's that for me.
Mm.
And I don't know that that's even a conscientious thing for you, bouncing between spaces and yeah. So if I know you personally and you tell, like, and I know your lifestyle, and it's like, then it's not deep, but it's like, but I don't know. And what I know is I saw someone's status last night, and yeah, bebumnandi. And now I see you there on the stage. I'm just like, I'm gonna pray for you first, and then I'm gonna join you in worship. But it does make me feel some type of way, and I don't know how I feel about churches using gigging artists in a Sunday rotation. I don't know how I feel about it. It's something I definitely would like to understand, and I've been asking questions about this. I want to understand and trust the leadership that chosen this model or this approach has obviously, or at least hopefully, done so thoughtfully, prayerfully, and there's a rationalization that they can, with confidence, defend, then cool. But if it's just like, hey, we needed someone come through, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I lean on agreeing with you.
What does that statement mean?
It means I'm speaking while thinking.
Okay.
I just man because what are we doing, right? Oh, I'm one of those character before anything else. And look, not one of us here can stand up and say we're perfect in any way. We all come with the things that we know we must do better in. And so yeah. But I do think that there is some intentionality that we need to have around um, who's up on stage, what are we pursuing, what are we about? Are we just here to fill a spot so that we can tick that we did Sunday, or is there a pursuit? And what are we asking of the person that we're putting in front of everybody to look at? There was something that I wanted to say. Okay, you can tell I'm just kind of processing aloud. Oh, I wanted to say that this is the importance of listening and the Holy Spirit, the one who leads us, because on one day, the Lord is doing something, and that person who was in the club yesterday is in church today, and God is doing something with that. And just because it looks like that, it doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing. On another day, it's like, no, don't do it. If I was to talk principle-wise, I would be reticent to do that. Just have somebody there because we need a bass player. I think now we have missed the mark somewhere. Yeah, I feel like I need a night to consolidate my thoughts.
I wonder if I'm going to add another element, and then Mojo is going to rescue us and bring us back to worship somewhere. But the only other element I'll add is, in the Old Testament, it was so prescriptive about what needed to be in place and who could or couldn't enter certain chambers of the tabernacle, and just what kind of person that person needed to be. And in the New Testament, Paul even speaks about how people who were approaching communion in an unworthy way were dying. And I think sometimes we abuse God's mercy and his grace on us. And that if you were to move even a little bit like he moved back in the day, whether we'd be playing around with some of the things we play around with so freely and so easily. For all the things, for all the times when people think, gosh, God is so harsh and God is so, I'm like, yo, he's so great, he's so merciful, and he's so patient. Like when you read how God used to move in the Old Testament, and you contrast like the kinds of things that people who even profess his name do today, I wonder how much potentially how much we take for granted his grace and
Yeah,
his mercy.
absolutely.
I did want to say one more thing about worship, but I will subordinate myself to the man whose hands we are in.
No, do you wanna share that, Sbu? Because then when I come in, I think I'd also want to potentially, so to speak, at least bring it to a resolve for now, because there are several things that were mentioned. Like, okay, look, there's this point, which I would argue may warrant a part two at some point. So, and then I just want to close with a particular thought. So maybe throw what you wanted to throw in there, and then, yeah.
Thank you, Mojo. It was just a characteristic for me about worship, and maybe I don't think I actually gave my actual paradigm on the thing. So I'll admittedly say, maybe I don't know if it's the season in my life or what, but I'm very heavily indexed towards worship as sacrifice. If I haven't said it enough in the first two episodes, well, I'll say it again now. And that for me, there's something to be said about Abraham viewing his act of taking his son Isaac to that mountain to sacrifice him, of him viewing that as worship. There's something to be said there, because there's so much richness in that story. There's this, Abram is this old guy. God promises him a kid. He and his wife, they believe, but they can't believe, and so then they try and use their own hands and to bring fulfillment to God's promise, and then that creates what mess it creates. Then the kid comes, and Abraham, who worships God, then falls in love with this child so much that the next thing I see, and this is now me imputing an interpretation of it on this passage of scripture, the next thing I see is God who says, okay, that son that you love so much, go and sacrifice him on the altar for me, right? And I'm wondering if maybe there's something about what happened to his love for Isaac that turned from what was a manifestation of a God worship to a self worship in relation to the love that he had. And then God tells him, go sacrifice that. And then that act of sacrificing his son, he terms as worship. And so maybe there's something about worship that is a denial of the things that were it not for God and Christ, these things would have the hold on us. And it is a denial of those things, and a sacrificing of those things to Christ that for me feel like a strong characteristic of what worship is.
That's brilliant. I think, Sbu, on what you say, well, I guess it's an aspect or facet of what we're exploring. Again, also agree wholeheartedly. If I'm picking up on some themes that we've been exploring and touching on, is the idea that, again, God needs to be paramount, or needs to be the ultimate, or needs to be at the top, and everything else needs to be subservient to that. And I suppose how we recognize where we stand is even potentially through, well, yes, our actions and all of that, but the the affections of our hearts, so to speak, and where if anything isn't secondary or subservient to God in any kind of way, or where God is not being viewed in the right way, then our worship is distorted. Like so, a recurring thing is for me in listening to the whole conversation is, again, where God isn't the absolute center and have everything, then we derail in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, that for me is particularly noteworthy. And as to why that's the case, or why we go left, right, and center, or God doesn't take that space, I suppose it even calls back to some of the conversations we've had about before, and self being at center or God not being at the center, things like that. Questions I would have wanted to ask someone, maybe that's again for the future, is why do these things happen? Sure. There's something that you've mentioned as well about the power dynamics potentially experienced within church spaces, for example, where we elevate certain forms of worship above other ones. That certainly is something that I would have wanted to really unpack and find is, let's interrogate that quite a little bit. So almost see today as an introduction to worship, where again, if the object of our worship is incorrect, then it completely it pollutes everything else, right? That follows thereafter. So if we're saying God should be it, and our worship is a response to Him, then let that be the case. And to Sbu's point, as well, the idea that God being the worship, His holiness, His absolute holiness, is something we should regard, and Him being the determinant of how we approach Him, for me, is fundamental. He determines how we approach Him, not us determine what is best in approaching Him, I think is key. So I want to maybe just leave it at that for now as a points forward to say, can we do a part 2 in the future? And I think get into some of the nitty gritty that I've mentioned, that we've explored. Any other thoughts?
I love that, but I cannot ask you one more question, Mojo.
Yes.
When Jesus is speaking to the Samaritan woman, this is in John chapter 4. Anyway, I won't retell the story, but there's a passage where he says to this woman, I'm going to read it to you. He says, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." Verse 23, which is actually the verse I want to ask you about. It says, "But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people the Father seeks to be His worshippers. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth." Just comment for me what you think Jesus is speaking about in those two categories. I'm keen. I mean, this verse it sounds like it's core to what we're saying. And so as you're putting a bow, here's this verse. It's core. Comment for me here.
No, 100%.
We've got a little bit of time.
No, it's all good. It's I mean, for me, it's a verse that I'm still trying to fully understand. To be honest with you, so in terms of having like a complete idea or answer of what that is, I can't necessarily claim to say I'd be able to give it. But some of what that denotes to me is this notion that even in approaching God, there must be an honesty in approaching God. So we've spoken about God being God and recognizing who He is, or a need to recognize who He is. But within this, which we didn't really touch on in detail, but it was part of that working definition I threw in at the beginning. There is talking about bringing in our truest selves. Is that there must be an honesty of self that is brought into that worship space, so that your true, uninhibited, unmasked, unfiltered, raw self is being exposed to this tremendous God. And in that, there is an exchange that allows you to experience Him in who He fully is, and in doing so, allow yourself to be transformed. So when we say in the, I guess the truth aspect of it, then potentially I guess the spirit side is to say there must be a vulnerability and an honesty that you bring into that space, and I think the mechanisms that are employed will either allow that to happen or will detract from that actually happening. So let's create or have spaces or or engage in manners that rather allow us to be truthful in what we bring, rather than them being us being inhibited in truly engaging with God in a true and an honest way. That's what I would say.
I enjoy that. I think well said. Very well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's
What
an
do you guys
implication.
think?
I love it. I love it. I'm with you. Does it imply, though? You'll tell me now whether I'm being unnecessarily provocative, but does that imply then, if I pull from what has been said here and some of the themes we've picked up on, right? So, and if we take the theme of vocation or doing or whatever that, so the implication of that statement is that at least one expression could pertain to us. If we take that, what we do, or our hope is that the things that we do are worship to God, right? So in everything that we do, it should be worship to God, whatever it is that you do. But if the thing that you're doing is out of position of where he intends you to be, then your worship is dishonest.
Are you, by extension, implying that God does not receive every form of worship you offer?
That's where I'm going. I just want us to get into this, the honest bit of the. I love it. I agree with you completely. So maybe the question is: do you think that worshiping out of position affects the honesty of our worship?
Well, what about, you say worshiping out of position, does it affect the honesty of your worship? But if you are out of position, what if in your worship it creates the opportunity for you to be repositioned? So in what you do in that particular space, what if it creates a mechanism for you to get back into alignment? So it's just, I hear the question that you're asking. I think why I don't know necessarily the answer. It's just, I think if one were to assume that positional misalignment is automatic disqualification or dismissal. I don't know if that is also completely right. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, by the way, either. I'm just trying to think a little bit through what you're saying.
Or maybe said differently, what are the things that can make our worship dishonest?
Good.
Can I say something? So I'm thinking of it in the context of offering and sacrifice you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me. So I mean, I think that's loaded. There's, we go through the ritual of whatever Sunday mornings and the singing and all the things that we do at church, or the things that we by rote play out in our day-to-day lives. And we can do those things without the heart being touched. And it says a body you have given me. There's something about a body, the flesh, offer up your bodies as living sacrifices. There's something that is honest, I think, about, in fact, is this whole thing not about are you living according to the flesh or according to the spirit? This what are you going to obey? And I think that is the more honest question. Is what you're doing a child of the flesh? Somewhere inside you're trying to please yourself, or is this fully a work of trusting God? And I think that is the base thing, because when I look through Scripture, God's invitation to us is just look at me, and I will draw you in the right ways. Even if you go around in circles, even if you get dirty and you find yourself in the wrong places, as long as there's a heart that is just looking to me, is wanting is looking to me, I'm able to draw that heart and put them in the right position. So I think it goes beyond the position, and it touches, are you offering up yourself? Are you offering up yourself as something that I can work with? And that is what the Lord wants. Yeah, perhaps we can go into that, but
if I can add on to that, I think exactly what you're saying, Mandla, and then what you said earlier, Sbu. You mentioned it as sacrifice, but I would take it to death. So death of the thing that attempts to fulfill the thing that God either wants to remove from you or fulfill in His ways for you. So to position yourself at the point of the death of that thing, whatever it is, I think is where quote unquote true worship begins.
Sure. Death. Yeah.
Because I think otherwise the alternative is trying to do both, right? So and I think I touched on this in the previous podcast jokingly. I will use yoga to worship God. So while you are mumbling under your breath to whatever, I will recite scripture or whatever the case might be. And it's like, okay, but if what if God is asking you to let go of yoga, can that thing die? And He will tell you what worship He receives. And if the answer is no, then that is the idol that you were trying to offer to God as a sacrifice. And He's saying, I don't want your ball. I want you. So something must die.
Objects, huh? Objects.
George, I did want to say, adding to your questions for a future time, and it's a question in formation. I started thinking about, could it be because God is infinitely wise and merciful and gracious, even when we don't recognize that in stopping something, he's often protecting us from something? Could it be that the notion of him being the object of our worship is also because nothing else is big enough to be able to handle being worshipped well?
Mm. Good question to add to the mix.
Yeah. Hey, we are ungovernable, Chief. If you don't,
No. I like everyone spoke. Did you have any closing comments? A closing comment, not a question, and then we close. Are halal. Okay, let him be. All right.
may God give us grace as we seek to worship. And it is my prayer that we as his disciples, in all our various shapes and colors and sounds and genres and denominations, would not seek to impute our own preferential perspectives of worship as superior and thereby subordinate others, save for those things that are untrue forms of worship. So save for those things, I think there's a lot of work that we have to do about creating room for all of us in our own hearts. I don't think we create enough room for each other within the
And that's that. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Mojo.
Yes.
Hey, thank you, Morena.
Yeah, excellent.
Will you click stop record then? I need to go.
Okay.